So, thank you very much for coming along. We are going to start pretty promptly, and hopefully we've given it an hour, but whether we get to an hour or not, we've got Q&As at the end. We've left plenty of time for that. So hopefully we'll be able to crack on with the content that we're sharing with you today. So Verity, do you mind sharing the slides with us so we can get going?
Sure thing.
Fabulous. It's gonna be a kind of flip-flop between Verity and I as we go through the presentation today. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming along. Our presentation this evening is going to be starting GCSE English and Science. We're going to be sharing with you the secrets to getting the best grades because it is obviously really important at the beginning of your child's GCSE journey to make the best start. And over the years that we've talked together, which we'll talk about through the presentation, we've picked up lots of hints and tips, and we've tried to filter it down to, we were having a long conversation, weren't we, Verity, about what are the most important things. There's so many tips. So hopefully the ones that we've chosen will be the most useful to you.
Yeah, excellent. And we've sort of dealt with our secrets chronologically. So we're going to start with, as Sophia says, right at the beginning of year 10 or 11 and how to sort of get organised. Then we're going to touch a bit on what sort of stuff, knowledge you need to know. And we're going to finish with sort of at the end of the course, the best way of revising, really the best way of making sure all that knowledge is consolidated. So if you haven't already, it might be an idea to grab a pen and paper because hopefully you'll have lots of tips to write down during the course of the presentation. As Sophia says, at the end of the presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A, and we'll also share ways that you could work with us if you'd like to do so. So in order to help your child get the grades that they want at the end of the day, because that's what it's all about. So without further ado, should we start with some brief intros?
Perfect.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Verity Bell. I'm the English educator. I teach English GCSE and pre-GCSE courses almost online. Before this, I was a teacher. I've got 25 years for my sins of classroom experience. I'm an AQA GCSE English examiner. And I'm also a published educational writer. I was in publishing in between my stints in the classroom. The reasons I love tutoring is because I get to reach every single student that I teach, which, as you'll know, isn't necessarily the case in the classroom. With classes of 30, although you do your absolute best, you don't always reach everyone all the time. But that's not the case with tutoring. Tutoring, you get to reach everyone. And it's the impact that you have, which is so exciting. For example, I had a year 11 student this year, who was not the highest attaining student by any means. He came to me when he was not passing at all. And he passed and he improved by 2 grades. And the joy that in his voice on exam day and the fact that he had got into his maths and science courses and wasn't held back by his English grade made it all worthwhile. So yeah, that's my reason for doing what I do. Okay. Sophia.
Brilliant. So about me, I've been teaching for a shorter time than Verity, but I'm also a fully qualified teacher. I've been 17 years in the classroom. I've spent 7 of those as head of department as well. My area of specialism is biology. So I teach biology all the way through to A level, and I teach all 3 sciences to GCSE. And really, to be honest, I'm going to echo everything that Verity said about reaching students that may not be able to access really high quality tuition in the classroom in terms of reasons for going into tuition. I now tutor full time. 99% of the time I'm tutoring online. I run one class that's locally face-to-face as well. And it is exactly that, of moving from teaching classes of 30, trying to keep on top of what's going on with every single student, to actually really focusing on working in small groups so that you've got 5 or 6 really motivated students that you can then really push on. Typically, in terms of results that I see in my business, is if I've got a student coming to me at GCSE, within about a 6-week period, we typically see about a 2-grade jump in terms of assessments and the kind of things that the grades they're getting from their teachers, which is now quite consistent, which is amazing.
That is amazing. It's great. And it is a very efficient way of teaching, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You can really drill down to the nuts and bolts of what the student is, where their gaps are in their knowledge, and get straight into exam questions. I actually know of schools that I've worked in the past that have actively said, no, in year 9, we don't do exam questions at all. We leave that all for year 11, which is actually completely against the way that I work. I think the earlier you can do exam questions, the more experience you're going to have, and the more you're going to be, this is natural and normal to be doing exam questions, although the learning curve is steep.
And that's such, I mean, in year 9, even students are ready, they want to start really getting towards the GCSEs. And in year 9 is a funny time, isn't it? Because it's sort of a hiatus between year 8 and year 10 when you really get going. So it's good to start early as well, I feel, in my
absolutely plants those seeds, doesn't it? For if I want to achieve this grade, I've got this really nice sort of runway, this pathway to getting to. And if you think about, we do have students that come to me and say, well, I'm only on this grade, but I want to get this, and they're not even confident enough to tell you that they want to aim for a grade 9. I hardly get anyone coming to me saying I want a grade 9. They might say 7 or 8, but actually getting to the point of being confident enough to say, no, actually I am aiming for a grade 9, and to make them think that that's an achievable goal within that time frame it's really impactful. I love it. I absolutely love it. It's good.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we said we were going to share our secrets, and we said we were going to start at the very beginning of year 10 and 11. So that is what we're going to do. And it was amazing, actually, when we were talking about the parallels between such different subjects. So I learned quite a lot about science in our conversation.
Yeah.
I'll just start off with GCSE English. Now, knowledge organisers, in case you don't know, I know we have a tutor in our midst. But for those, I don't know whether, Vicky, you know what knowledge organisers are. Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he uses those already. Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. It's great that use them. It's a case sometimes, though, of using them actively. Quite often these things are handed out at the beginning of the 2-year period, and they're not looked at. They're put at the back of the file until the end of year 11 when you start revising. So what I advocate doing is having almost like a blank knowledge organizer sometimes. I have a template which I'm happy to share, for example, about Macbeth. And as you learn key points of the text, you can write those things in the knowledge organizer. So it's very personalized, and it's a personalized one place where you have everything that you need, top line, I suppose, about this particular text. So that's one piece of advice. Have blank knowledge organisers ready at the very beginning of the course. Second one, create quotation flashcards. If I had £1 for every time a student had reached year 11 and right at sort of midway, and only just, if I'm lucky, started creating quotation flashcards, I would be a very rich woman. I think it's really important at the very beginning, when you're starting to read the book, to start to collect key quotations, whether it be just on old-fashioned pen and cards, or on something like Quizlet, digital flashcards, which they can learn on the go. So yeah, that's definite. Start as early as possible, because once you get to year 11, you've got so much else to learn. Quotations, you don't want to be learning them right at the last minute. They need to be part of your psyche from sort of year 10 onwards. The other third thing is a bit of a bugbear of mine, annotations. In year 7 and 8, students don't necessarily learn how to annotate correctly. They might go through a text and make a few notes about the literal meaning, for example, of a line in a line of poetry or a line of Shakespeare. And it's just, literal meanings only get you so far, particularly when you're expected to unpick quotations, to understand exactly not just what they mean, but what the author's purpose is, what the language technique used is. So the sooner a student learns how to annotate correctly using different colours for different things, using a key, is the better. And it really doesn't help them in year 11 if they get there and they've got great swathes of text which haven't been annotated. It means essentially they're starting all over again when they start to revise.
Fabulous. And you can see on the board there that actually the GCSE Science mirrors it in terms of how we've put it into this table, but the knowledge organisers that we have in science now, obviously depending on the exam board that your child is sitting for the GCSE science exam, you will need to obviously find that out from the school and make sure that you're using the correct ones. But you can actually buy little books. CGP do a little book of ready-made knowledge organisers, because science obviously is a knowledge-heavy subject. So the ready-made organisers are a really good starting point at the beginning of the GCSE. And similar to the English, there are also, I have banks on a USB somewhere. They've got to go into my Google Drive, but banks of blank templates of knowledge organisers. So you've got the broad kind of subtopics within a topic, and then you can fill in the ideas as you're doing your active revision. So knowledge organisers are really important. And in science, again, it's that helicopter view of the whole topic, and then going even further up, the helicopter view of the whole course as a whole, so that you're organized in your head, you know what the big picture looks like. And that's really, really important, because it can get very overwhelming very quickly if you're within a topic, you're doing it in class, you're not quite understanding it, but you don't know where it fits into the wider context of a bigger topic or the exam. So knowledge organisers, absolutely. I've put down, again, creating flashcards as well. So I'm a massive advocate for making your own handwritten flashcards, and not having too much written information on a flashcard. There should be trigger words on that flashcard that your child can then use that trigger word to produce a sentence. So if you wrote the heart, for example, that should be a trigger in their mind for a sentence about the left side of the heart, the right side of the heart. What does it do? What are the different parts of the heart? It's only because I've just taught it a minute ago that the heart's at the top of my mind. So creating your own knowledge flashcards. I use websites, and again, electronic flashcards. If you're desperate for them, that's absolutely fine to use ready-made printed ones. CGP do good ones for revision, but they have questions on them. So as opposed to the knowledge, it's trigger questions that parents and students often use together. So that's quite a good little tip there as well. So the sorry, that's my phone just falling. The CGP flashcard pack, and creating your own flashcards and using them for active spaced revision. Lastly, I've use mind maps to plan your revision. So again, this is really alluding to that helicopter view of the course. So I would suggest a big sheet of A3 paper and actually mind mapping out, right, paper one, what are the topics that go in paper one biology, for example, all on one sheet. And then you can go back and you can go, right, I need to actually rag these. So I'm going to rate these as red. I've got no clue what this topic's about. Amber, I know something, but I need to go back and do some work on it. But also green, actually, I'm quite confident with that. We might have just revised that in class, or I might have just revised that independently. So mind maps are a really good way to kind of give you, again, that kind of helicopter view, wider context of where am I at? And then you can go, right, how am I going to strategically plan my revision to maybe start with a trickier topic, maybe with a tutor, maybe with a parent, maybe with a friend. And the amber topics, actually, if I'm feeling a bit middle of the road in my revision, I might go for an amber topic so that I know some stuff, so my confidence already there a little bit. And the green topics might be something that I'm not panicking about, but I will go back and make sure I have a look at that, but not as much as the red or the amber. So it really gives you that kind of, I can't think of the word, prioritization, that's the word, of revision using a mind map.
Can I ask you, Sophia, because it might be different from to English, but with the mind maps to plan your revision, is it something that a year 10 could do at the very start of a course? And if so, how are they going to find what's going to be included in the course?
It's a really good question. To be honest, I think it's a good idea to start using those mind maps right from the beginning. So some schools, a lot of schools now teach the GCSE Science all the way from year 9 because it's such a content-heavy course. If you use, so I use CGP revision guides, and they are like my kind of, the quality of CGP revision guides is just really, really high in terms of content and being able to revise and coverage of the whole course. If you just look at the contents pages in the CGP revision guide, they break up the content for paper 1 and paper 2. And if you're not sure what that is, again, you can pop me an email and I'll go through and show you. I've probably got a video on it somewhere. But yeah, if you look at it as a whole, even though you might be getting taught the beginning of topic 1 in class at the beginning of year 9, say, you know that your big mind map, you know what that big picture looks like. So by the end of paper 1, whenever that point might be, these are the topics I'm going to need to know. So I can start doing my flips learning. So start pre-learning stuff as I go along. If I'm that way motivated, absolutely, I would 100%, I would say, have it in your mind. You've got to know the end of the journey, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think research suggests both in English and science that typically high attaining students tend to want to have that bird's eye view of things and make the links in their head all to make more sense. Yeah, to know where they're aiming.
This is it. This is where the mind maps come in, is making those links, absolutely, to make remembering the next thing easier. So those memory skills come into it as well, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. So our second secret here, again, is know your stuff. Okay. And this, again, alludes to the vast amount of content that we are expecting a student to be able to remember, understand, and apply by the end of the GCSE course. And so it was really hard to really get this down into 3 points for the GCSE in science. And so I'll try and be as concise as I can. So the first one here is using quizzes. So in the classroom, we call this retrieval practice. And this is basically really short, snappy questions to see that you can remember the key information. So this is like 10-question quizzes. A lot of revision guides, I want to say Collins revision guides have started doing them a lot more, where you've got a page of really simply worded quiz questions to see whether you remember or not. Okay, so that's the first one. So the more often you can do this, the more you're going to remember and build that memory bank, okay, and come and revisit them. Secondly, using assessment feedback. Now, one of the massive problems we have in science is that you do a topic in class, you learn it with the teacher, you do the end of topic test, and then you get your mark, and then you move on to the next topic and you move on, and the same thing happens, that you get your mark back and then you move on. There's not necessarily always quality feedback given, and also not necessarily always time for that feedback to be acted upon by the student. Okay, so what that means is you've had 10 questions in a test, you made a mistake in question 2 and question 5, but you've not gone back to question 2 and question 5, the content of that, to fill those gaps in your knowledge. Okay, so coming back to it is really important. And again, I would say that is one of the things, as a tutor, when I was doing a lot of one-to-one back in the day, that was a lot of what I was trying to pick apart. Where did you make a mistake? Let's fix that before we move any further, because we don't want this coming up again in year 11, right? So that's our second one there, using assessment feedback. And lastly, I've got get familiar with past exam papers. This doesn't necessarily mean in the early stages of doing the past exam papers, because that can feel like an overwhelming thing to do. I would say I actually say this a lot for A-level, and for GCSE, not often students that actually get to do this. Is get yourself a past exam paper, just look through it, okay? Have a look at how is it structured, how many questions are there roughly, just so, again, we're making it normal to sit for longer periods of time to get to doing questions. We're making it normal to see the kind of exam language from early on. So they would be my 3 key things for the GCSE science.
Okay. Yeah, and there's not a huge amount of difference with English as a discipline anyway. My first tip is to do with planning essays around key themes. Like science, there is a great deal of knowledge needed to do well in GCSE English, and particularly around the set text, which need to be mastered before the exams. And the unfortunate thing is, in class, there's not a great deal of enough time really to go from just annotating and understanding the text to applying that knowledge in relation to particular essay questions. It's a big leap, isn't it? From understanding the content of the text to critically understanding, having a stance or opinion on it, to being able to assimilate all that knowledge in a well-structured essay. And tutors such as myself do courses on this sort of thing, which we'll talk about later. But in the absence of a tutor, one of the really good things to do is to plan an essay around key themes. So, you've got the knowledge, the relevant knowledge for that particular exam question. Because there are exam questions which come up again and again in different guises. In English, in AQA, for example, it's either theme or character, and it's on key themes as well in Macbeth, for example, or in Romeo and Juliet. So if particular essays can be planned against around, for example, how powerful Lady Macbeth is, or how violent Macbeth is, or the supernatural in the play, then your teen their knowledge is organised in a way which will help them once they get to the exam, rather than being sort of this nebulous mass of information which they don't know what to do with. It's far more clear cut, and less overwhelming as well. Now, like Sophie was talking about assessment feedback post-practical, the same is to do with English, in the sense that if you write an essay in class, normally essays are set for homework, which is a difficulty when it comes to learning English at school. You have all this knowledge put into your brain in the classroom, and then you might have a model paragraph, and then you're sent away to write an essay. Then you hand it into your teacher, and a couple of weeks later, because they've got 30 plus to mark, then they get their feedback back. And the feedback is not necessarily incredibly detailed, but it is really important for students to act on this feedback, to actually redraft at least part of the essay based on this feedback, because it is the only way that you're going to improve on what you're doing. I'd always suggest, if a student didn't understand feedback, to seek out their teacher and say, look, what is this about? What do you mean by analysis here? Because the research has suggested it's the number one contributor to improved grades, is this ability to reflect and improve on what they have produced. So I know that quite a lot of classrooms have DIRT tasks, which is directed reflective feedback sort of thing, but it's perhaps not as detailed or extensive. And of course, in the class, you haven't necessarily got everyone who's totally committed to doing this. So yeah, that's one tip. The next one is to write key scene summaries and character profiles. And this is just because it's a way of having a one-sheet crib sheet when you get year 11 on, for example, Mr. Burling and Inspector Calls. So you can look at the sheet and see, right, okay, here's the key quote on him. This shows that he's pompous, or this shows the arrogance of men when he refers to the Titanic being completely unsinkable. So all of that is extremely important, just to be there, so you don't have to keep flicking back through the text when you're revising. So it's just a way of making things more efficient when you get to year 11. Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to move on to practice makes perfect. This, as we said, was sort of towards the end of year 11, mid to end. Ways of making revision quick and easy. Well, easier anyway. So, Sophia, do you want to crack on with yours?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the GCSE Science, we talked about making the flashcards. This is now about actually using those flashcards. And there's a technique that we call spaced revision. And spaced revision is basically where you've got your pile of flashcards and someone might be testing you on them, or you're testing yourself on what you can remember. And you would make a pile of the flashcards of the things that you could remember, and the things that you're finding trickier to come up with, or to put into your memory, if you like, would be a different pile of flashcards. So you've got the ones that you know really well and the ones that you don't know really well. And then what you would do is the ones that you don't know so well is come back to those more often. And then the ones that you already know, again, come back to those less often. And they then start to embed themselves into your medium to long-term memory. Fingers crossed. That's the plan. So spaced revision using flashcards is the first one, and testing what you know. The second one here is using topic-based exam question banks. So as we've already mentioned, science is a massively, massively knowledge-heavy subject. And where you would have an end of topic test in school, we can use and we can find online particular banks of questions that are based around a certain topic. So you do your revision on that little chunk of information and you practice questions based on just that topic. I also make a point of teaching students how to mark their own answers as well, so they know exactly where they're making the errors. So topic-based exam question banks is a really good way of building confidence as well, rather than saying, here's a past exam paper, get on with it, which can be quite scary and daunting. The last one there is to practice past exam papers under timed conditions. And I would say definitely I do have more motivated students currently that will have started already in year 9 doing exam papers just to have a go, and they're confident enough to do so. But certainly towards the middle of year 10 and beginning of year 11, we should be now getting full exam papers and using, we say in English, in GCSE, in science, there's a word there, in science, I get the students to aim for a mark a minute on the exam paper. So if you're doing a 5-mark or 6-mark question, put a timer on your phone now, put a timer, I don't know, on your actual watch or whatever, and time yourself to try and get those marks within that minute. So that's kind of as a rough rule of thumb there for the timings.
Lovely. So there's a lot of synergy again with English. I won't repeat what Sophia said about flashcards, but if you were to do them physically in English for quotations, what I would always suggest is to have a gapped version of the quote on one side and then the full quotation on the other, with the scene and the character and what theme it relates to on the other. So you're actually actively testing yourself as you're looking at the flashcard, rather than just reading it and going, yeah, I know that. Okay. I also advocate using model answers. So these are available, for example, on examiners' AQA examiner reports and Edexcel. They're freely downloadable, and Edexcel are helpful enough to actually say what grade a particular answer was given. So particularly for ambitious students, high attaining students who have an ability to critically sort of evaluate something, it's very useful for them to have written an essay, perhaps had it marked by a tutor or a teacher, and then to compare it to a grade 9 answer to see where the gaps are in their knowledge. Particularly, for example, if this grade 9 answer is very good at incorporating context, which is something that English literature students often struggle with. Again, also practice past exam papers under timed conditions, exactly the same. English teaching in schools tends to prioritize literature because there is so much knowledge to get across, as I've said, as Sophia said. But the problem is that rather neglects language and language skills, and timed exams in the English language papers often don't happen until quite a long way through year 11. You do have a mock in year 10, but often it's not the whole language paper because of time constraints. So again, it's a good idea if a student feels able and not overwhelmed to at least time themselves on particular questions. The language papers unfortunately get more difficult as you work through the papers. And so typically their time is squeezed by the time you get to the higher mark questions. So it's really useful to get quite quick at doing questions 1 and 2, 15 minutes done, move on with question 2. And then there's enough time for the end of the paper and to really shine in that sort of 40 marker, which is the creative writing. Okay, so we promised that we talk about ways of working with us. We're not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but we thought you might quite like to see our timetable for September, and feel free to take a screenshot or a photo with your mobile phone if you wish. I didn't know how useful it was to include a QR code. That's just basically more information on my courses and pricing here. I don't know if you want to add anything, Sophia.
No, only to say that, well, there's my timetable. The next slide I think talks a little bit more about in terms of Q&A and things as well, but I think it's helpful to have on there to see where we're at the moment and what slots we've got available. So,
what I will say is mine is a mixture of group and one-to-one. I've got a limited one-to-one slot, mainly groups, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But there's a mixture of hybrid courses and skills courses. So there are some video courses which focus mainly on building knowledge of specific text, or there's skill courses. So you can choose whichever would suit your team and their level of knowledge. Okay, freebie time.
Yay! So thank you so much, Rosie, for putting these together, but a nice selection of freebies here that you can download. So my revision timetable, particularly for year 11 students, how to create that revision timetable, and your resources that you put out there, Verity, which are amazing as well. So hopefully these will be helpful in moving your child along as soon as possible, really.
Yeah, I hope so. This is the freebie, which is linked to my Computer Confident video hybrid live lesson course. And this is to do with a language course as well. So it's past papers with guidance. So this is sort of the interim, I suppose, step to timed conditions. You can download this, have your team do it under time conditions, and then read my feedback. So you know exactly where your team is doing well and where the gaps in their knowledge as far as the language paper AQA might be. Okay, so ask us literally anything about GCSE English and Science, and we'll do our very best to answer your questions. Sorry.
I have one, if that's okay. Verity, does your advice for all of that apply as much to language as it does to literature?
In what sense? As in all the tips?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, you were talking about quotes and stuff. Would that apply just as much to the language side
Oh,
of
I
things?
see. No, that's a really good question. The language paper, it depends though. If you're talking GCSE, it doesn't apply. These are completely unseen questions in GCSE. So the skills that you need to learn with GCSE language are very similar to literature, with the exception of learning quotes. So,
Right.
which is a relief in a way. So but things like text annotations are very applicable, and you have to get very quick at making perceptive annotations when you're dealing with an unseen text. But the exception is IGCSE. So international GCSE courses are based, if you're talking about Edexcel specification A, you talk about that many of them are based, the language paper is based on an anthology, which they have to learn, because I think mainly it's closed book. So yeah, that needs to be, that applies to that language paper. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Fabulous. Can I ask a question, Verity? This is something that we were discussing. It comes up a lot when I am speaking to parents about tuition. In terms of what we do at the moment, we both of us are the vast majority of time teaching in groups. What would you say to a parent that might have a concern about their child being taught in a group?
Well, first of all, it needs to be said that sometimes these concerns are valid. So, for example, if a child has a diagnosis of dyslexia or slower processing skills or something, you know, there are valid reasons for wanting one-to-ones. But on the other hand, in my experience at least, and I think in yours too, most students who are relatively high attaining or want to really realise their potential, who are sort of flatlining, plateauing at level 4 and want to get 6, 7, 8, 9, are fine in groups, thrive in groups. In fact, this is certainly the experience of my year 11 students, and there's a few reasons for that. I think we both experienced it. They tend to be, because they're very small groups of 6 or so students, they tend to be very supportive of one another, and will also it's friendly competition. Oh, I did this, I got this, and how about this, and what do you think of this question? And yeah, it spurs them on. So that's one of the advantages of group tuition. Would you like to add anything else, Sophia?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to add, I think we were on a call in a Facebook group a couple of weeks ago, and we were having a look at this as well. It's very much, I think there is a misconception that the one-to-one is somehow sort of superior to tuition in a group. I very much advise when I've got students coming in for doing the GCSE Science tuition is if they're in year 9 or in year 10, a group situation or group learning environment can be really beneficial, because yeah, exactly that, they've got that competitiveness within the group. And I do say, it's like, imagine taking the 30 kids in your science class that might be bouncing off the walls and disruptive and lots of things going on in the lesson, but imagine taking the 5 or 6 really motivated students and putting them together in a class, and the magic that happens when that group is put together. It's really amazing, and they do spur each other on, and it's just a whole new environment, a new bubble to be in. And it's that thing of like being around the people that you aspire to be with, like, you know, you become the 6th person in your group of 5 that you hang around with. And so that, I think, is really impactful and directly related to grades as well. Students make as much progress within a group tuition situation as they do with a one-to-one. And so again, the impact for us, for you and I both, Verity, as tutors, it does also mean for us practically that we can reach more students as well with our expertise, because there are now fewer and fewer really expert teachers in the classroom, like real experience teachers that are there. So it does mean, as we've talked about lots of, kind of previously over a cup of coffee, reaching as many students as we can do. I think it's a real valuable thing to do. So yeah.
Yeah, and the online world is a wonderful world in a sense. Yeah, in this day and age, we can use breakout rooms, can't we? And send pairs of students to do things and then come back. And you can go into the breakout rooms with those students and give those two students really personalized feedback, and then you bring it back and you add it into the group. You can have group writing as well going on in English, where everyone is collaborating on one Google Doc, say. So there's an awful lot more you can do in a group than you might be able to do in a one-to-one situation, and as well. So yeah, I think we've pretty much covered that one.
Covered everything. Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant. So Verity, thank you so much. You've put our contact details on here as well. So at this point, I think we're kind of reaching our conclusion. So I just wanted to say, on behalf of Verity and I, thank you so much for taking the time to come along this evening, particularly as we're quite aware that a lot of people start back at school tomorrow. So it's quite a key point in the term. And hopefully you found the information helpful, and all the details are on there. As I said, our contact details are on there, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon. Do let us know if there's anything else we can help with. We'll be much more than happy to help with any other questions or queries that you've got going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do send your questions. It's always interesting to hear them and respond as best as we can.